Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today. Just a quick housekeeping note before I pass things over. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent out afterwards, so you are able to rewatch it, share it with colleagues, and take additional notes. And also in your GoToWebinar instance, there is a questions panel. Please feel free to toss questions in there and we can ask our speakers throughout the presentation, but definitely towards the end. And with that, Rick, I'll pass it over to you.
Darius, thank you so much. I'm super excited for today's topic. Darius sort of reached out, I think a couple months ago and was like, hey, we wanted to talk about the skills gap and what's happening out there. And I immediately said, we should get Deidre Diamond on because she's the definitive expert I go to talk about these things, right? And so today we're going to talk about the skills wars and a new perspective. We're going to cover a whole lot, everything from leadership to management. But I first wanted to take a minute to introduce our esteemed guest. Deidre Diamond is CEO and founder of CyberSN.com, a cybersecurity research and staffing firm, and the founder of the not-for-profit Brain Babe, which is helping to desexualize industry conferences and events while helping to bridge the cyber talent gap. Diamond's vision and leadership has resulted in a dramatic decrease in the frustration, time, and cost associated with hiring and job searching in the cybersecurity community, while also supporting equality for women. Prior to CyberSN, Diamond was CEO of Percussion Software, the first VP of Sales at Rapid7, and VP of Staffing and Recruiting for the national technical staffing company, Motion Recruitment. Diamond leads with a strong commitment to transparency, equality, training, support, high productivity, and love in the workforce. And I'm Rick McElroy, Principal Cybersecurity Strategist for VMware Carbon Black. And I just know the first time, I still distinctly remember, like the first time we met at an RSA conference, and then I was like, yeah, I need to spend some time and pick your brain, because one of the number one topics I get asked to speak about are, the skills gap. How do we find people? How do we build people? How do we manage those people? How do we lead them? And I think your expertise is unparalleled in the industry. So, Deidre, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for speaking on this topic.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. It's great that I get to see you and you don't get to see me. That being said, I'm looking at you and I'm feeling like you're looking at me. So it's good to see you. It's great to be here. There's so much in this topic, and I'm super excited to dive into it with you. And I love what you did in taking the conversations that we've had and putting the play on Star Wars, or maybe now it's Space Wars that comes out tomorrow on Netflix. So I like your analogies. It's awesome.
Yeah, and look, I think there's always a perfect state in my head. Like, I'm just one of those people that sees the perfect state and then can never get there, right? He's constantly trying to tune it. And so I know, my own journey, I think the journey for a lot of us that have traditionally started off on the highly technical side and then been asked to move into management, asked to move into leadership. So sometimes you just find yourself thrust in a position where you're hiring and building teams and you fail a bit along the way and some of those lessons. But in my head, I always went, yeah, we have to recruit people, right? We got to bring them into the organization and train them organizationally. We got to train them on the team for the specific roles and tasks that they're going to do. I know a big part of what most of us try to do is provide that continuum education. Sometimes that's seen as a job benefit, right? And then we continue to retain our employees, we continue to grow them, and then hopefully eventually we train our replacements, they advance in the organization, and we move on to take bigger challenges. But what I actually wanted to talk to you about is, like, that's not actually true. That's not actually what happens. And key for me, right, is 38% burnout rate. So you want to talk a little bit about what the current state actually looks like from a recruiting perspective out there?
Yeah, absolutely. This topic is near and dear to my heart because, I worked 21 years for the same two serial entrepreneurs across 3 different companies, and you mentioned those companies they were the founders of. And, never did we have the problem to say that the story wasn't true. That's exactly what happened in our organizations, and we built other organizations because that's what we did. And yet the external world, as I call it, isn't experiencing the same thing. And so, when I really started thinking about this topic was when I founded CyberSN, having left staffing for 10 years and gone into software, Rapid7 and such, and then came back much older and wiser with a different set of glasses on. I really thought, what is going on? Cyber professionals are the protectors. They are the ones that are in the modern war and out there to protect us all in so many ways, not just financial, it's certainly health and safety and economically, everything. And yet they, chief information security officers moving jobs every 18 months in the United States. And what happens if that person's leaving every 18 months? And we all know how broken job searching is, like just searching for a job and being matched to the right job is such a broken system. So that means that person probably had to start to look somewhere around 8 months, maybe a year into their job, which means of that 18 months, they weren't committed other than 6 to 8 months of that 18 months, because we all know it takes a year for an executive to find their next role, really, unless they're unemployed and they have all day, every day to pound the pavement. And so I really just started to say, yeah, it's great to service my clients, and yet let me bring the content that I, sort of was introduced to out of college and then worked, with others to master, to say we need to, there's other ways to do this. And part of that is, changing the job searching, system, and we'll talk about that later. But the rest of it is this whole, we all want the same 7 things in life, in work. So let's baseline that and let's focus on retention, because retention has been proven to be the name of the game. The stock market values retention. The stock market values, 10-year employment, and it's valuing diversity within teams too. And so we know why. We know the studies have proven, and we'll talk about it in a minute. So yeah, this burnout, I mean, it's just it gets a new name, sort of, dissatisfaction is what it used to be, right? Now it's burnout, and there is some elements of burnout that are more mental health for sure. But what is more challenging to mental health than job dissatisfaction, considering our brains need fed, fed goodness in order to be happy? So there's so much intertwined into our emotional intelligence skills into this. And I know we're also going to get into that. So yeah, we all want a career path, and to not have one is just unacceptable. Like nobody should not have a career plan.
Yeah, and I think you nailed on a couple of things there, which is one, I don't think you can get a cybersecurity strategy done in 18 months. I'm sorry, I'm just going to call it the way it is. One project inside of a large enough org is going to take you 18 months to do, right? So
Yeah.
To your point, I think the longer we can keep and retain our teams and march in the same direction, like the better that is for InfoSec as a whole. Certainly your organization, but I think when you start to roll that up to a nationwide, to a global level, however you want to carve that, it's like I need a team to go accomplish this mission, and then I need some air cover from the organization on that, right? And if I have teammates that are resentful because other people have left and they're doing more work, and the work continues to pile up, yeah, like I understand why individual contributors and leaders are out there looking. So look, I think we talked a little bit about the problem, right, which I like doing. But what I want to talk about is a new perspective on this problem, right? So you've done an inordinate amount of work specific to this topic, right? And not just specific to InfoSec, but to IT as a whole, which I would rate, like, I think a maturity rung up from like role definition and tasks and all of that good stuff, where it was like security for a long time, you were just a security person and that meant you did security things. But that's not really defined, right? So talk a little bit about that new perspective and why you think we have to take a new strategy on this.
Yeah, absolutely. What you're referring to is just how we find and match each other, right? So there's it's not a new perspective to say that we should be taking care of our people and training and developing them. The manufacturing era figured that out. The financial era figured that out. They still have, that's why those companies are as large as they are. They invest in succession planning. They invest in training, right? There's no new perspective. We're just not doing it. But in terms of the new perspective, meaning we're not doing it in cybersecurity, there isn't really any succession planning. Maybe in the Fortune 50, stretch it to the Fortune 100 if we're lucky. And yet that's a small portion of us all. And even within those systems, they struggle with contractors versus permanent, and how do we treat contractors versus permanent people? It's like, well, they're all humans. Why are we even having this conversation? And yet, laws that passed in the late 80s made us now have this CapEx, OpEx idea of humans. And so we're stuck in that weird world. And so that, again, is a whole, system change of how employment is provided and taxes and all that. But in terms of, what plagues us all every day, you as a leader, Rick, and finding, people to put on your team, you and yourself, whenever it comes time that you need to find an opportunity, even outside of cybersecurity, we have a broken job searching and matching system. And meaning the ability to interview for jobs that are actually a good fit is rare. We kiss more frogs than we ever find a match. And all of that leads to settling, even though the mind may not be saying that to the human that they're settling. But the reality is they are, because at the end of the day, if you start a job search, that means you're hiding, because most everybody's employed job searching, certainly in cyber they are. And that means you have to hide behind the backs of your fellow teammates, your management, and whether, you may not like a few people, there's definitely people you do like, and you're either hiding it or you're distracting them, and it's just yucky and not fun. And so imagine that you're already sort of in that zone of, sort of confidentiality, feeling like you're cheating almost. It's a terrible feeling. And then to go have all these mismatched interviews that take your time, and then you find one that's definitely not a mismatch, or the truth is it maybe not even fits all your criteria, but they gave you more money, and like everybody gets it when they do make the move, even though that's not why they started to make the move. And now I see that as settling. And it just breaks my heart, when I came back into the industry as somebody who's never settled in my career, who's always had these great, opportunities ready for me by the folks that I worked for. Seeing this, and particularly seeing it in cyber as a sociology, criminal justice, education background, and where I like to focus my thoughts, I thought, this is crazy. We can't have a broken system of finding each other for jobs that then cause us to be so distracted, not happy at our jobs, which is a vulnerability in itself, and we're the protectors. And so between that and my challenge as a business owner to have an effective cost of sales so that I could really truly show up and provide services for cyber professionals, I had to say, we need to baseline cybersecurity professional, tasks and projects in a common language so that we can minimally create jobs that make sense and match each other that make sense. And so we've been doing that for a long time. I know I'll show you some of that beauty later. I know you love it. It's super amazing. We need to make sure that this goes into all, employment searching and what have you. But again, we just launched in August, and it's in the beginning and stages of, sort of getting it out to the world. And yet today people are job searching on a regular basis and having this horrible experience of wrong matches and wasted time, lots of time. You know, sometimes it's not in the second or third interview that one discovers the job's not right for them, you know, for them, right?
And I just think if you calculate it all up, internal recruiters, external recruiters, you know, and you start to add the time in. You know, I've heard from some CISOs out there, they were like, senior security architect, we expect 9 months on that hiring process to identify a candidate. And then I was like, just to get a short list of people who you would possibly bring in 9 months. I mean, you know, and then my head starts running on all the InfoSec things that aren't getting done in the meantime, right? So I think to your point, how do we speed up given current conditions? Well, I think this is an area we can focus on and help speed up, right? Because I think there's some work to do. Certainly, I think getting people onboarded faster as well, but just in that initial relationship match, it takes too long. And frankly speaking, you know, lots of times it's still TextNet. Like you're still texting the network that you maybe built. If you haven't built one, then you're probably in more trouble in the hiring process, right? But yeah, it ultimately comes down to who's looking, and then Slack channels get spun up. People pass you opportunities. But even then, sometimes it's just like people have these vagaries on what the job is and like what the outcomes of those roles are. And I know that's an area that you've talked about, but you know, for me personally, putting this webinar together with you, I always enjoy learning, right? Like I run my mouth a lot, but I like to learn. And I think Project Aristotle is one area where I was like, I didn't know about this. This is really cool. And so I'd like you to talk a bit about it and how it's sort of framed, you know, that new perspective.
Yeah, for sure. So, you know, when we look about hiring, I like to start with retention. And retention of talent or humans really requires high EQ, which is emotional intelligence. It is how we interact with others. And as you can see here, there was a study that was done not too long ago with Google, and they found in Harvard, and they found that the managers that are liked the most and that are most successful, not just liked, but you know, a lot of success, projects completions that are wins, retention, have the higher EQ skills than the IQ skills. And it's not to say, in my opinion, that one's more important than the other. That being said, you can't have one less in the high category than the other. They both need to be high, you know, certainly to play in the realm of, let's say, a Google, if you will. And so, you know, you mentioned, you know, so if you think about that and just, you know, put that on hold for a second and then go to what you were talking about, where it takes 8 months to fill a job at best internally, which actually my research shows that it takes 8 months for an internal recruiting department to be willing to give us the job to work. And so, you know, most aren't filling the jobs at all. And that's because they're generalist recruiters, right? And cybersecurity is not a technology. You know, there are more technical recruiters than there are technologists. That group of folks speak a language that is not cybersecurity. In fact, cybersecurity is, and you can find it on my website at cybersn.com, is what we've created, which is now 35 job categories. It was much less when we started, and over 115 and about 117 titles now. So for instance, a security engineer could be 7 different titles of a type of a security engineer, if you will. And so you have generalist recruiters thinking they can fill the job or want to fill the job because their commissions or bonuses or however they're compensated, they have to, and the business above hasn't said to them, hey, this is a specialty role, don't even try, like this is a waste of time, put it out. And unfortunately, the business of cyber hasn't been able to conquer that. Now, you would say, well, we're short 500,000 people in the US. It's not that, it's the shortage. Well, I wish what I was about to tell you isn't true, which is 89% of cyber professionals, and you can say the same thing about tech, don't love their jobs. They don't love their jobs, so they're recruitable. Why don't they love their jobs? The number one reason is that they don't have opportunity. They don't see advancement. They're not being invested in, and there's no plan for them. So if you've got a plan, you can recruit people. But that doesn't mean that you can recruit them like you recruit technologists. You're not going to find them all on LinkedIn, specifically the hardcore technical cyber professionals. They don't want their identity out there. It's one of the reasons why on my platform, professional profiles have no identity whatsoever. There's no way you can figure out who they are. And yet all the content that's needed to understand if you want to talk to them about your job is there. And so what we have to do is we have to use our emotional intelligence to really think through that, these people speak a different language and they need specialty recruiting services, and it isn't going to be to just lump them into the tech recruiting. And so, the emotional intelligence piece comes from a cyber leader going and talking to the business saying, I need this help, and not being turned down. They're turned down constantly. I know, to use an outside agency. And so then what happens, Rick? Then your team gets overworked and people get burnout, and then you lose your people. And then now you get to go use the staffing agency. I mean, come on, it just drives me crazy. So we've made services to allow the internal recruiting to do half the work. We'll do the search and match, you do the rest. And, for those, teams that actually can have the bandwidth, but majority of what we do is full service because our clients actually understand it makes no sense to try and do it on their own. It's too complex. And you have to be in where cyber professionals hang out. You're not going to just find everybody on LinkedIn. And even if you do, most people park their LinkedIn profile. They're not even checking that email. It's just to make sure that their identity is not stolen. It's really the leadership crew, the management crew that has LinkedIn profiles.
And from an overall business perspective and business outcomes, right? I mean, one of the things I think I was fascinated with is, as they're doing the studies, as they're looking at Project Aristotle, like they find a direct impact to high performing organizations based on EQ.
For sure. For sure. And it's true. I mean, I know it from my own experiences. We had in all of those companies, and still today, tons of joy at work and high performance, creating a company from scratch, never mind the things that we do today and done in the past. And so it is electric when you create, you have this emotional safety underlined here. It's that ability to really say what we feel, think, and perceive, and be supported positively versus negatively in those statements. The majority of the time, that just has to be. And when you have that, my environments, I've had investors in the past, and people come in and they call it bottled lightning. When we walk into your office, it's like bottled lightning, like we just want to, it's contagious. And that's what happens when you apply all of this, which is, sort of this business plan of roles and responsibilities really clearly defined. I think you have a slide on that. Sort of everybody understands each other's roles and responsibilities from down to the perspective of tasks and projects. And then you apply the IQ, EQ, both being important, such that our personalities are one that are contagiously positive, that really impact others positively, such that high performance occurs. And then, of course, people don't leave those jobs. I never took a recruiting call. You don't take recruiting calls when you're super happy. Some people say, well, I like to practice. You wouldn't do that if you're super happy. You wouldn't want to be practicing, So it's really important that we understand that it is a skill. Emotional intelligence is a skill. The skills need practice as much as our IQ skills need practice. It's not, oh, I read it and I understand what it means and then it's out. No, you have to learn win-win communication. You have to learn, word usage. There's words that I've eliminated from my vocabulary because they are ineffective to creating 100% of the time positive results, right? And you and I were talking about this the other day, with the word but. You just add the word but in a sentence and you're totally changing what you're saying and yet pretending that you're not, which is usually called lying. So, hey, Rick, I really loved your presentation, but what happened to the part about retaining talent? Do you think I liked your presentation?
Yeah, I mean, I've got thick skin, but I get it. I mean, well, I think, and what we talked about yesterday is like the intentionality behind it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
The intentionality to build a team like this. So if you're a reverse engineer, what are the steps that you need to create a team, right? With high IQ, high EQ, and so that's an area I wanted to talk about as well, right? I mean, I think if people are watching my video cam, I have a technical book right next to CISO soft skills, right? What can we do right now with teammates to, and yes, like I need threat hunters that know TTPs and know behaviors, but how do I start to build a program of education for
Yeah.
EQ? Is it just I start doing it and then I pick a couple of things, or what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One is, I think first is framing it so that everybody understands why it's important, right? Now, as defenders, we must understand that our attackers, all they're doing is thinking about how we feel, think, and perceive. So if that's all they're doing, then it would behoove us as defenders to enhance our skills of how others feel, think, and perceive. And that's exactly what the framework of EQ is all about, is the ability to think about how others feel, think, and perceive before we act. And within that is win-win communication, making and managing measurable agreements, and then words usage and is in this. And this one here is, making and managing measurable agreements is the number one reason we have breakdown. It's what we call politics almost in business, or whoever's got the most power wins. And the reason is because there was no defined measurable agreement. And so when something doesn't go right and there's no measurable agreement, then it's pointing fingers. And the person that's got the most power that's pointing the finger is the person that wins. And the person that loses is whoever that finger's pointing to. And it could be a person, it could be a team, right? And I see this so much, coming up from sales, of course. My career started in sales before I led tech teams and certainly founding my own organizations. People, it's a little bit easier when you have a number that you're required to have, right? And yet the number could be wrong, and so it doesn't really actually wash out to easy, and that can make everything bad. But when we think about projects in general, there's just way too much work being done, and nobody knows how to measure what done is or the process of done. And that is causing a lot of breakup, Rick. And I think actually at the Chief Information Security Officer level is where we see the most of it, because again, to be a Chief Information Security Officer, well, of what? Right. I mean, it's not, even if it's okay, it's one financial company to another financial company, doesn't mean it's anywhere near the same job. I mean, this is what I mean by like cyber security is not a technology. It's the business of protecting information and humans, and physical buildings, right? Physical things. And so, it really is super specific to the job, and yet our interviewing processes are so horrendous that we're lucky if we get 3 hours with somebody before we get an offer, and we're all like somehow on the same page as to what the job is. No, that doesn't happen. In fact, it's the number one thing I do when I come in. It's why I built my platform and the technology, is that the first thing I have to be able to do, and anybody on my services team, is what is this person going to do every day? I need to be able to know and measure it. How much of their time is doing that task or that project? Because how much time is on that task or project makes a difference to the humans that we show as much as whatever those tasks and projects are. And so, this is really hurting society. I'm sure there's tons of people listening saying, happens on a regular basis, that projects are just not defined. And I'll just wrap with this. Of course, there are times, this particularly in, let's say, startups or your startup team, startup companies, where we truly can't make a measurable agreement because we just don't know enough yet. Well, then the measurable agreement is that you don't have a measurable agreement and you set a date and it's in the calendar to get back together. And the measurable agreement is you're going to go figure out X and I'm going to go figure out Y and we're going to get back together. So that's what I'm saying. It isn't to say, oh well, it's just startups or we got to move fast. Listen, I come from sales. I move services and products. That is definitely in my DNA, and that I can tell you it can be done in a way that allows everybody to be on the same page, which is what we're talking about. Because at the end of the day, humans prefer to be feeling successful, like they did a good job, and if they know how to measure their themselves, then most humans will just rock it. It's
Yeah, I agree. I think and you brought up, at the CISO level, it was so undefined when a lot of us started that it was basically like a negative measurable agreement. Like if you get a breach, that's the agreement. You're walking,
right.
you're quitting soon after, and and I know, like, Gary and I have done a bunch of talks on CISO burnout, and like one of the leading factors in our opinion is that there is no measurable agreement on what is our InfoSec program mean? Like what is the definition of good? What's the definition of good enough? And then the time that it takes to educate your board and your leadership on like what those should actually be. But what I'm encouraged by is I think the organizations that have embraced this the heaviest are retaining their CISOs. I mean, I talked to a CISO the other day, 15, 20 years, and they have been through multiple breaches. But one of their agreement is you don't get rid of great leadership just because there's failure along the way, right? And I thought that applied specifically to security leaders is a huge breakthrough, right? Because it was just like we were sort of getting beaten down as a community because it's like, oh yeah, we're just one breach away from being out of work for no good reason other than things happen and humans do things and make mistakes, right?
Oh
yeah. That part's been tough. So I think
to add to that real quick, Rick, I encourage everybody, and particularly chief information security officers or CSOs, and really everybody, to take your interviewing process into your own hands and to make dang sure that you really understand the job and that everybody's on the same page, such that you know exactly what you're going to accomplish in 90 days, and thereafter in that first year, and make the company have the discussion. What's been happening in society for far too long is waiting for what we call leaders or managers, and you and I had a discussion on this the other day in terms of which is which, to sort of show us the way. And what I want to say to everybody is we're in the era of individualism and transparency. And so from a transparency perspective, it ain't going to happen. Don't wait. Don't put your future in somebody else's hands. Like you do have choices, particularly in cybersecurity. You are wanted, even though the system is super broken and ridiculous. And so if you take it into your own hands and really own the conversation of what's the job so specifically, that you can make a decision, then that's great. And if any organization isn't interested in that conversation, well, definitely not the place to work for. So instead of, sort of getting people to want to hire you, look at it as, I want to find an organization that actually, can engage in a conversation and work through, such that we understand what we're seeking to accomplish together during the interview process. And anybody who's not interested in that is a bad place to go. And if we don't go to those places, then they'll have to change, So I really recommend people look at interviewing differently than what we've all been brought up to think of it as. Sort of answer whatever questions they give us, and really it's more about taking control of the conversation and figuring out what the job is for sure, so that you can make a good decision.
Yeah, and along those lines, right? Like qualifiers for a company. I don't know that. I sort of learned, again, putting this webinar together, that these were the 7 things I actually cared about. Like I just framed them differently, right?
Yeah.
But I love where you start, which is like, do I feel valued as an employee, right? So you want to talk a little bit about, the 7 things we're all looking for in a relationship with our orgs?
Yeah, this was a talk that I created for RSA maybe 4 years ago or so. And again, to prove the point of, how much retention matters is to say we all want these things all roll up into retention, right? People that are retained in general, certainly in cyber or a skill set that's hard to come by, this is what everybody wants, and yet it's not what's happening. Out in the workforce. These are the reasons why people are leaving their jobs, or the opposite of this is the reason people are leaving their jobs. People don't leave companies, and really they don't even leave jobs, they leave people. So the first one is to feel valued, that it's a feeling. Like literally people are leaving because they don't feel good coming to work. It doesn't feel good. Now that's ridiculous, because I was 23 years old when I was given my first management job, and I was brought out to dinner for my promotion, and I was told, "Are you ready to turn on and off the lights?" And I thought, oh my gosh, is this person really saying this to me? I'm the first in, I'm the last out. How the hell would that change now with more responsibilities? And of course, all in my head that's going on. But what I'm saying is yes, 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 yes. And it was only a few years later where that person and I were in this discussion, and I realized that what they were talking about is that my job turns humans on or off. I have the power to turn people on and turn people off because I'm a manager, because I'm responsible for their careers, that I have that power. And so thank goodness, naturally I like to make people feel good. And it wasn't necessarily something I had to learn. And yet it's all I see out there is people not being responsible for how other people feel. Now, I know our brains are our brains, and we choose what emotions we feel. That I also know that if I have power over somebody else's finances, then I absolutely can trigger that feeling without them having a choice to feel it. And because we have the subconscious mind that runs 99% of the time, and I can hit that program, right? By using words like but. All I had to say was, Rick, I really loved that presentation. That was awesome. And then look at you and smile. Why not say a couple of things that I liked about it? What's the harm? In fact, it's not harm. It's what make people feel good. Sort of have that discussion, and then get to the point of the stuff that I wanted to see about human resources, and that's really what we're talking about. That skill to know that my job is first to help this person feel valued, make sure they're feeling valued. That's my job. So the subsets of all of this are the how, in terms of a little bit, and then of course who doesn't want to be paid the same as their peers are being paid.
Yeah, that's I can't believe that's still on the list. Like,
oh,
that's terrible. Take it out. Like we've been, yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't need to but I'm just like, how does this work in organizations with pay bands? I'm confused.
Yeah. And to work around kind, respectful people. You read love in my bio, and that's funny, that was a really old bio actually, and so I haven't heard that in a bit, and it is something that I bring into the workplace, and that doesn't mean I'm not somebody that holds people accountable. Just because I'm kind doesn't mean I don't have an environment that is high accountability, high attention to what somebody's saying or doing, and as a manager, meaning it isn't one or the other. And unfortunately, love and kindness has been seen as this weak, like hippie, wait, maybe I'm from California, call me a hippie all day long. But the reality is I'm a business player too, and it isn't one or the other. I certainly can tell you that you can create wealth and still be kind and hold people accountable.
Yeah, and I would just say again, my own personal journey, right? I mean, we have a completely different leadership style in the Marine Corps, and you have to work to change some of those habits. I mean, you have to be intentional about it and work on it. But I can only say, in my career, like being clear on my communications, and being consistent, and then just being kind and respectful to the people around me, and trying to elevate them. Like, that's something that I try to do, is just whatever their path is, I'll help them if I think I can. But I think those things have created those leadership opportunities, right? Not just because you happen to be the senior person that has done the thing the longest, which I think is part of the issue, like that led, the historical issue. It's just there was a lot of folks who got promoted into roles that probably didn't have the proper training, frankly speaking, and then a lot of us made a bunch of mistakes, and tried to learn and then reach out for some secret sauce. So
Yeah.
for me, you represent like a bit of that for me moving forward, right? And
Yeah.
this is the other thing that I think I wanted to anchor around in this prezo, and we're going to quickly in a couple of minutes, show how this manifests in the real world in the CyberSN platform.
Yeah.
We do loops all the time in InfoSec. I always say it's not an InfoSec presentation without a pyramid and without a loop. Those make the good ones, but we're not actually applying this to our people. So we'll apply it to our OODA loops for decision making. We'll look at the adversarial behavior in a loop, but talk a little bit about like what do we need to do just to like take care of our people.
Yeah, for sure. So this was also an RSA talk that I created, I think 2 years ago, and I called it the human hygiene model. Again, I'm constantly, working my brain to speak the language, of others, and yet still speak the language that I know, which is, the human hygiene model that I pay attention to. And so it's just different terms, right? Like those of us in, that utilize technology and have business skills are constantly identifying our systems, purchasing software and hardware, making sure that we have backups, monitoring, updating, it's sort of a classic cycle, right? So I thought, what, I'm going to use that and say, apply that to humans, everybody. Like, put as much time and attention as you do into buying software, as you do into hiring a human, meaning spend the time to craft what the tasks and the projects that you need completed are, and keep that, updated for everybody on the team so that everybody knows their role and their responsibilities. And then you have that and you say, okay, now a disaster could happen. I might be great at retention, but somebody's personal life, something I can't control, and I lose people. Well, what am I going to do? Because if I don't already have my solution set up, I'm wasting time and I'm causing burnout and stress to my team. So where do I go for my talent, both perm, contract, consulting? Like, what's my backup when I do lose somebody? Because even the best of us will lose at some point. And then I say to myself, okay, I've got everything baseline, I've got my backup plans, and now I just need to participate and be in the now with my teammates, which means monitor, check-ins, breaking bread. We're all on Zoom now. Well, break bread on Zoom. We do it, there's no reason why anybody else can't do it. Get your wine, your whiskey, whatever it is, our president loves bringing his cigar. That's what he brings, and sits outside. It is both as teams, as individuals, with our managers, the ability to stay in tune. And so there's staying in tune and monitoring based on projects and tasks. And then there's monitoring, staying in tune just on how are you? How's life? Just having a relationship that is one of genuine interest in others. If you don't genuinely have interest in others or caring for others, do not take a management seat. Managers aren't leaders necessarily. There's tons of leaders in companies who don't manage people. But if you manage people, you must be interested in the care of those humans, or you cannot take that seat. And so if you're monitoring, you're caring. And then the update concept is, what are you doing to make sure that these people are growing and achieving more skills, learning, and paying attention to them being updated? So this model is, a cute way, fun way of saying, hey, let's put as much time as we do into our hardware, software, hygiene as we do our human hygiene, workforce, or management hygiene of our humans. So.
Yeah, again, that intentionality, right? And then, you're going to need feedback loops for yourself and some room for improvement. But I think if you have clear communications and you make mistakes, and they do happen, and I've certainly made a ton, I think they're just easier to clean up and move on.
Yeah.
Again, if people know you as a person, I know where your heart is. So like it's unquestionable for me, as we're working on anything together, like what your intentionality behind that is, because you kind of wear that on your sleeve, right? So I think as a team, like that's important too. Is like if people know your heart, if they know sort of what your true norths are, then yeah, when you make mistakes, you clean them up and you ask for some forgiveness. But I think, you know, for me personally, like having just a long line of managers who were like that, like I've been extremely lucky in my management and leaders from that investment perspective. Like I can't. I just wanted to emulate a bunch of it, like when I got into those roles, right, and hopefully provide the same value to the next person, which I think, which is a good segue into how we manifest this in like the real world from a recruiting perspective, right? So let's take a little bit of time, just a couple of minutes, to sort of run through the platform. But I think there's some interesting pieces in it, especially as it comes to definition of tasking. Which I think is to your point about measurable agreements. We're already getting that wrong up front, because it's just you know, I need 10 years of InfoSec experience plus 15 hunting, or you know, whatever crazy requirements, right? So yeah, let's talk a little bit about how we manifest this in a better way.
Yeah, totally, absolutely. You know, that without the identify phase, we can't really do the rest of the phases at all. So I'm happy to sort of walk you through. I know you enjoy seeing it. I do too. I'm going to take control here in a minute and share my screen. Okay, there we go. And you all see go to webinar. All right, Rick, can you see my website? Rick, are you able to see my website here? I don't hear you anymore.
Sorry, I was on mute. We're good. Yeah, we're good. Sorry. Apologize,
good.
audience.
No worries. So yes, what I wanted to show you is, so Rick, what we've been talking about in terms of identifying people, one of the most, you know, important things for us to do when we come into account is create a job that looks like this. So let me just first show you what we're going to go create, right? A job that is specifically sharing the tasks and the projects, and then how much time they expect this person to spend on it, right? Because you know, Rick, that if you look at this information as a hiring manager, you know whether or not you want to talk to them about your job, right? You know. So I'm going to take you, and you and I are going to have a fun little, you know, experience together, taking a job that takes us less than 5 minutes to create. And this is a system that we utilize to onboard all new clients. It's also out there so that anybody can go create their own job. You can export it. You can then you know, social share it. I'm going to do application security because I know you and I both know that world very well. Not that we need to, but it's
so hot. So hot.
I know. But as you all could see, there's like tons of titles. Like we do only security. This is all security. So that you can go in here. You can select your job. You can create it, export it. You could post it for free too if you want it. A lot of my clients use their job to get budgets approved, to speak to the business, and such that there's an understanding. And they also use it to define all roles and responsibilities within their team. So that's a free. You can do it anytime. So you know, the system highlights, you know, the functional roles that probably go along with an application security title, right? But you can add more. Or you could subtract if you wanted. I'm going to leave the 3 that are most common, and then, you know, you're a hiring manager, right, Rick? And I say to you, okay, Rick, you want an AppSec engineer? Are they going to perform application security testing? And you say, yeah, they are. And then now you have to think, well, is that dynamic testing, static, both, interactive, application, right? And so, you know, if we say yes to dynamic, well, how about the tools? That certainly helps somebody, not necessarily, you know, the most important thing, but it certainly helps somebody understand whether they're interested, because again, we've got passive seekers. Maybe they love Burp Suite, right? And so, you know, you get the point here, Rick, and I know you and I have been in this before, and it's super comprehensive, right?
I found it. I'm not gonna lie. I found the exercise because we just opened another rec for the same exact role that I do, and I found the exercise helpful to frame that. like honestly to frame it, and then help to I think drive better measurable agreements than I had when I started, because it was a little undefined.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. This is going to help measure, managing up, I call it, manage the people above you by giving them good information so they can understand it. So now, okay, well, what are they doing with architecture and design? We know what they're doing with AppSec. How about, performing product security design? Okay, what types, right? Makes a big difference as to who's qualified and interested. Remember, again, like the goal of a job platform, or certainly the goal of all of our, getting rid of these wasted interviews, is making the searching and the matching super easy, right? So imagine that if you're a professional on my platform, making your profile, which you can do and have it out there, and I'll show you in a quick second, to where nobody knows who you are, and you're using this same common language taxonomy. Well, now imagine what kind of matching I'm able to do, which we do incredible matching. It's why we fill jobs in under 40 days and have plenty in weeks. A major healthcare company just yesterday called me like, I can't believe you folks filled this in 2 weeks. I just can't. And they're a new client. And I said, well, thanks for the call. I can. We do it on a regular basis. The average is just under 40, but that's mostly process, right? Lots of people around the world. I mean, we're super capable because of this, right? So I'm going to now finish up with the penetration testing portion, if you will, and what have you. And then, it's going to roll up into what we saw earlier. I just want to show how, there's still all this here. All right, so I'm going to finish that, and then I'm going to just scroll back up, because my next button isn't there yet, Rick. Remember I told you last week? That drives me crazy.
You did. I was like, please put that at the bottom. And I know you're working on
it. Doing it. If they're listening, or when they listen, they're going to scream. But you can see I'm now saying, okay, you chose all of these yeses. What percentage of the time do you expect them to be doing these things, right? And the great part of this exercise is a sense of reality. So you see this 100% here. If you go over 100%, then you probably have an unrealistic job description. And it's either, 2 jobs you need to make it, or you need to change it. You need to say, they're going to do less of that and more of this, take things off. And so for us, with our clients, as you can see, it's super helpful that they can really engage and be like, yeah, right, okay, so, they shouldn't be thinking they're going to do all of these things, or make it into 2 jobs. And, that doesn't happen as often as, of course, we'd all want, but it's mostly subtracting things. And the importance level is that, again, passive job seekers, whether it's they found your job on a board or somebody sent it to them. I mean, there's always this job description, interaction. And I'm just going to do this quickly so that we can see the result. There's always this interaction. And so if the job description doesn't tell me for sure, what am I going to be doing? Is it a permanent job? Is it a contract job, as you just saw there? Is it an internship? Is it contract to perm? Some guideline on what the salary is, and whether or not I have to have certifications or I don't, where the location of the job is, can it be remote? If I know these things as a passive job seeker, will you pay for my reload, partial or full? Will you allow me to work from home? How much will I have to travel? Like, if I know these things, if you'll sponsor my visa, do I have to have a degree or I don't? If I know these things in one mobile view, here we go, then I can be a passive job seeker, which means I don't have a lot of time to invest. I'm not happy where I work, but I'm super busy and I'd love to find something I love. Well, if I can see it like this, whether I go find it on my own or somebody sends it to me, I can say I'm qualified and interested. And when we can do that, which we do, this system does, then we can get out of this, we're no longer are these 90% of the interviews, crappy interviews, right? So So that's the experience. You saw how quick it was, and as you've done, Rick, you can export it, you can use it in the business, you can create your whole org chart. And I'll just finish up with saying, at the same.
That's cool too, by the way.
Yeah.
Just I don't like to interrupt you, but I thought that's really cool. Like if you're new CISO, new program manager coming in to build the program, like you can actually start to build an org chart. And what's even cooler about that is you can bring it into your org and then say, these are the skills and the roles that I'm hiring for, and then here's why, which I don't remember having that. So I'm just going to say this is the first time I've seen something like that. And I might be wrong, but I don't ever remember having access to something like that.
Yeah, it's game changing. And it's what I had to do to have a effective cost of sale. That's why you don't see other staffing agencies only doing cybersecurity. Like, they're not only doing cybersecurity, because unless you have this, there isn't a chance in hell, unless every person that's in the staffing position is a cyber SME of all 35 job categories. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And so the other thing I wanted to show you is that you can also, the flip side of this is, as a professional, I can make my profile. These are just browsing. You can browse this from our platform. These are professionals that have made their profile. This is somebody that's doing a lot of 10%ers, right? Probably working at a small shop, But the idea is that this profile allows me to have a public-facing profile where nobody knows my identity. I scrolled a little fast, but let me go back up here. No, everybody's identity is this. No company names, right? Just the title that they occupied, right? And so, as you can imagine, we utilize this for professionals and jobs, and our matching is, pretty incredible, right? It's game changing, and so. I made this platform international for the world with free job postings, free putting your profile there, because, I want to change this game around the world, and particularly for cyber professionals, but certainly for everybody in terms of how we search jobs and match jobs. And I'm proving it in cyber first, because we have a national security issue right now in terms of how we're searching and matching each other, without a doubt, causing vulnerabilities within our cyber teams that have nothing to do with technology or other people. So I'm super thankful that people like you, Rick, see the value, and the community's been amazing to us. And I'll stop sharing now. I really love this community. They're super lovely. And so this is my gift, as well as it helps us service our clients.
Nope. I think you're very clear in your intentions. Like, you want this to work for everyone, and it doesn't today. And there's just going to be a bunch of work between now and then. But I think with folks like yourselves sort of leading that charge, and especially sorting some of us out that have just been on other journeys, like we've been spending all this time on the technical skills, right? It's hugely helpful. And so with that, I'm going to ask you for your final closing thoughts before we wrap this webinar up, because I thought it's been super informative. I always appreciate hearing from your wisdom and guidance. Yeah.
Yeah, well, to tie this into the skills war, portion of it too. So we're talking about the people that already exist into the program. I'd like to just wrap to say, this will allow us to bring people in easier. When we can understand what the workload is, then we can sell above us to get juniors in, to get entry-level people in, to have the succession planning, because we have a skills war. But at the same time, there's been a lot of work put into training young, not young in age, but new to the industry people into cyber, but they can't get in. They can't get jobs because people don't have the, cyber teams aren't thinking of, succession planning and juniors, because, it's not defined enough. So I believe this will change the game for that too. Never mind the fact that, I'm doing all kinds of things with not-for-profits that have been training, folks in cyber skills and offering them as contractors to get, at low, let's say no profit, if you will, just to get them in and so forth. And so, if we want people, we want more people in, then we really need to define what we're doing. And so this to me is the baseline of it all. And any feedback or comments, always welcome. This was the common language taxonomy was built by our cyber team, our Chief Security Officer, Don Glavich, and his folks, Eric Ligda, and they're super powerful, lovely team that's been with me for quite some time. And, we're here, and we always love feedback.
Yeah, I would say if you can't find her or myself, you're probably doing something wrong. We're pretty responsive. So hit us up on Twitter, LinkedIn. You can find us. I mean, you can shoot me an email at rmcelroy at vmware.com if you're looking for some more info. But I wanted to thank everybody for taking some time with us. Definitely wanted to thank you're just so awesome, and I appreciate you spending some time with us today and contributing back to the community. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. I feel the same about you. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.
Until next time, everyone. We'll talk to you later.
Bye-bye.